Um, and then we're talking from the time of 4 to the time of 7. Now you've got the additional controls of schooling that also bring us back into line as what's acceptable socially, what is not acceptable socially, and so forth. And so that's already also controlling us. And this is all still happening before we have a completely formulated mind-based idea about what's going on. So can you see why you don't want to face your addictions? They're pretty big reasons, aren't they? Can you see that? Yeah? Jen?
It almost feels like it's survival of my whole life.
Exactly. It is survival. The reality is that with this childhood stuff, it was survival. You were placed into a situation where you learned the only method to survive was to feed addictions and have addictions fed. Does that make sense? Don't go into your fears. Don't go into your grief. You learned at a very young age not to go into your grief. You learned at a very young age not to feel any anger, generally. You learned at a very young age to suppress both grief and anger. You learned at a very young age that every time you felt afraid, generally someone made fun of you or humiliated you. So you learned to not do that either. So what's left after all that? Get your addictions met through any form of control possible. That's what's left. That's how our addictions came to be. Right? Can you see that? So this all starts with that process, and then we end up with these beliefs. There must be something wrong with me. You're angry about being told there's something wrong with you all the time. You're exhausted about being told with no clear concept or way of how to fix it. You're never told how to fix it generally. You're only told there's something wrong, right? No one tells you how to fix it. And so you go into control to avoid the process of all this crap that's coming at you. And then, of course, this desire to stay a victim also begins because it's sort of like we believe we're a victim. And the reality is when we're a child, we are. Right? So that becomes a truth in our childhood generally, that we are a victim of everybody else's projection and everybody else's crap and everybody else, what they do and say and feel about us. And every time we try to process, somebody shoves us back down again. And so in the end, we do believe we're a victim because we are. We are a victim of all this crap coming at us. And then we revert to feelings like this, like, don't tell me that I've now got to go back to my emotions. Every time I ever went back to my emotions, I just got abused. What I'm saying to you is God's way is to actually connect emotionally to everything. Don't tell me that. Like, how dare you tell me that? Every time I try to connect emotionally, when I was a child, what happened to me? Look at what happened to me. What happened to me is I got abused more, I got punished, sometimes violently. All these bad things happened to me every time I did that. So don't tell me go back to my emotions. I just want some addictions met. That's all I want now. It's the feeling, right, inside of us. And that's why we don't want to know or feel our addictions. Because we have all of these belief systems that were true during our childhood. And we've grown up with them, and because they were all formulated before our brain was even fully developed, most of us don't even realise that we have all these feelings that were formulated that have become what I would classify as beliefs. Does that make sense? They are now beliefs. We believe them to be true. And then some idiot comes along claiming he's Jesus for a start, and then secondly saying, you've got to do it exactly the opposite way of that. You go, don't be stupid. Like, how dare you say that that's the case? Because my experience through my whole childhood has been exactly the opposite. So everything's screaming at you, saying, no, everything AJ's talking about here is actually wrong. That's the feeling the child has. The child inside of you has this feeling. That everything I say about going back to emotions and dealing with emotions and facing your addictions and deconstructing your addictions, all of that is wrong. It's not going to work. It never worked all through my life. And when we say all through my life, what we really mean is it never worked through all of my childhood. It never worked. And because it never worked then, it means that that's real. That means that I'm right. It means that it's never going to work. All right? And can you see there's also a fair bit of anger in that feeling, isn't there? Like, you can feel the anger in that kind of feeling. Don't tell me things that are never going to work. I have had a personal experience with this. I have lived, and even if you're only 15 or 16 years of age, you have lived 15 or 16 years of age, and the entire period of time generally has been telling you the exact opposite of trying to get into emotions or into feelings or facing your fears or feeling your addictions. All you want to do, really, internally, all that we want to do is create more addictions. That's the feeling we have. Scott?
So I just realized the connection between having the intellectual, like, yeah, this is the best thing I've ever learned in my life.
Yep.
But emotionally feeling hopeless.
Exactly. So whenever anybody starts hearing divine truth, which is God's way of dealing with things, we automatically go, there's a soul-based attraction to it sometimes of, wow, that's what's happened to me type of attraction, an acknowledgement of what's happened, which, by the way, feels good. You know, when I acknowledge to you what's happened to you in your childhood, you feel good about that. At least somebody's acknowledging what happened in your childhood. But then you also feel bad because I'm saying that God's way is the reverse of what you've now learned. Right? And so everybody then feels bad and hopeless about that way because all they ever experienced through their childhood was the feeling of hopelessness about how to get away from these projections and emotions. And if you're honest with yourself, the majority of you feel like pretty hopeless about it. And to be honest, you would be far better feeling hopeless for a little while about this issue of addictions than worrying about even getting to one of them. Does that make sense? Just feeling the actual emotion that everything is hopeless, and that emotion was created in your childhood, usually by the time you were 3 years old. All right? This is why most of us feel hopeless when it comes to dealing with our emotion. Does that make sense? Does that help with understanding why? All right.